and perhaps I'm the only person waiting between closing the session and finishing it. So I'll try and be brief as I can, uh, because a lot of points have already been covered, and I think difference. I represent an NGO, by the way. I'm from an NGO which works on environmental issues. So many times NGOs and governments have a contradictory point of views. But fortunately, here in this forum, I and Dr. Chatterjee seem to agree on most points. And that's an interesting bit, that we have no difference of opinion, and we are on the same page at this point. You know, we started back on electronic waste long time. I remember we started in 2003, so it's about 20 years almost. When I look back and try and analyze things today, we looked at electronic waste so differently. It was a question of how do you deal with this waste? What is it doing to the environment? And look at the changed perception or changed viewpoint of this waste. Today, the world is looking at it as resource. Can I use it? How can you junk it? Everybody in the world till to about from 80s to 2000 were landfilling this waste. They were sending it to African countries or to Asian countries to deal with this waste because they didn't want to deal with it. And look at this whole strategic viewpoint on materials and resource. It has changed the global perspective and how you look at material resource. The country's economic growth and its strength in economy is going to be decided by what kind of resource and material you have with you. That is the viewpoint of the global world today. All over the world, people are talking about, do I have this or do you have this? How do I preserve this? How do I conserve this material? Even if I have a resource in my mines, can I hold on to it? That's the viewpoint of the world today. We need to be very mindful of the conversations which are happening globally. It's critical for us because we have a large population, we have a large consumption pattern, we will need large amount of materials, as Professor just mentioned it. So we need to be very, very mindful of what is happening globally. You looked at pandemic, and post-pandemic is a very different world scenario today. In the pandemic situation, if I just remind some of you, and Dr. Chatterjee just spoke about it, that they're looking at setting up semiconductor facility in India. We were just stuck. Nothing was moving because there were no semiconductors coming. This global supply chain disruption happened, and we were stuck. Look at the other issue that perhaps comes to my mind today is countries had money, countries had every resource, but they didn't have vaccines. You were stuck. Nations were stuck for vaccines. So it's an amazing situation that you come to think about what does resource and material and know-how actually mean in today's day and age. And that is why a resource like, electronic waste and the kind of materials that it has a very different kind of a viewpoint and perspective. And for a waste which is growing at such a fast pace, you will require much more of material, and the way we are extracting material today is highly unsustainable. It's just about total unsustainability is the buzzword today, and you will run out of this material in the next maybe 20, 30 years. Many of these materials and commodities will be over. We will not have it in the mines, or you will need to spend huge amount of energy which might be economically or commercially not viable to use this, or you will have to look for alternate materials. So that's the scenario that we have, and that is why it is so important to look at electronic waste. I don't know if should I call it waste or should we start calling it as resource, which is end-of-life resource that you have with you. How do you deal with this end-of-life resource now? Basel hasn't changed the definition of waste, so I cannot call it a resource. But the fact remains that it is going to be difficult to, discard this waste. We will have to deal with this waste, and that is why this whole concept of circular economy that makes really sense to us. And we need to be, on board with this new conversation very, very fast. We need to reorient ourselves. We need to, as a nation, we need to look at new paradigm, new kind of policies, new shifts, new thinking on circular economy. I know many discussions that I have been with Dr. Chatterjee also, or other people. Uh, there is still a lot of reservation on circular economy, on eco-design, on many of the concepts that we talk about, like right to repairs, eco-design, resource efficiency, recycling efficiency. All these terminologies perhaps are very difficult to, at this point of time, to internalize and to think about it, that how can the Indian industry or Indian economy deal with some of these things. But the fact remains that we will need to prepare ourselves at this point of time, because if you don't get on board at this point of time, you would have lost the battle. You're going to be left far behind in this. And I think time has come to start looking at some of these things. When you look at the old laws that we had on electronic, and that's why I say the perspective has changed, so you can't have the same laws and just tweak it a little bit and you think that you're going to, make this happen. It's not going to work that way. You will need a different thought process when you're going to deal it as a resource. And we are going to deal it with circularity in your mind. We're talking about eco-design. There are many products that we're manufacturing in this country. We can't say that we are not manufacturing anything. Every electronics item is imported. No, that's not the scenario. There are many electronic goods that you are manufacturing today, many products that you're manufacturing today. We will need to talk about design. We will not need to talk about upstream issues. We will not need to talk about removing toxins from this material. We will need to talk about all these things. We will also need to talk about minimization of waste. We will need to talk about recycling and efficiency of recycling. And I think to do all of these things, or to achieve many of these things, I'm not saying that as a nation we can achieve most of these things. It might take us some time. It might take us another 5, 7, 8 years to do this. But the fact remains that we need to start preparing for it. We went wrong in many of these things when we were talking about it. And some of the biggest bottlenecks that I see is the collection mechanism. It's been a very, very big challenge for India to get the collection network in place. We also have another big challenge about recycling efficiency. The third has been technology, with to some extent, you have some indigenous technology, but we need to, if we're talking about resource efficiency, we'll need to talk about technology. We'll need to talk about cutting edge technology so that you are able to recover resources to about 97, 98% efficiency. And so I think these are all issues that need to be dealt with. So the way forward is, I think, perhaps is, infrastructure, technology, entrepreneurship. I think for policy to be, can't be top down. It has to be very consultative. It has to be very collaborative kind of a approach to come to a policy framework that works and that helps everybody. You need to incentivize a lot of things. As governments, as policymakers, we need to incentivize. We can't be over-regulating a situation. And we need to see that people are encouraged to come forward and become entrepreneurs. People are encouraged to come forward and do a good job, and they're rewarded for it. I think that is the way to look ahead, rather than just over-regulate and just penalize for everything. Penalization is required, but that's not the only way to do things. I think many of these things have been done that way. But when you're looking at efficiencies, when you're promoting efficiency, you will have to address some of these things in a different way. So that's all my point. Thank you very much.